right, welcome to 90 over 90. It's our distinct pleasure to share this morning with Gwin, Barnwell, Dalton. Gwin has led and continues to lead an extraordinary life, and we'll speak more about that in a few moments. Gwin was born on October 28, 1924 in Greenwood, Mississippi, and she spent her early life in Gastonia, North Carolina. She was married to the late Robert Isaac Dalton for over 70 years, and they have raised together two daughters, Millie Dalton Cox and Dee Dee Dalton Kaufman. She's the proud grandparent of 5 and great-grandparent of 8.5. She is a graduate of the National Cathedral School in Washington, D.C., and holds a degree in chemistry from Duke University. She is an author, having recently published her memoir entitled The Throwaway Summer, which we'll hear more about. She's an artist, sculptor, actress, singer, and she and Bob have always been heavily involved in her community and charitable life of her community. I could go on, but we have a lot to talk about, so let's get to it. Gwin, I don't really know where to start, but thank you and welcome to 90 over 90.
Thank you, Rob. I'm glad to participate in this.
You're a brave woman.
And if you would wait a few months, it'd be 90 over 95.
That's right. Well, I said October 28, 1924. That would put you at 94. I had the discretion not to mention your exact age, but I found that most people I interview who are in their 90s are proud to be in their 90s.
I am. I'm very proud. I've never kept my age a secret, because when I was made of cotton, it was put all over the papers, and anybody who can count knows how old you are.
Well, I think it's a badge of honor, and we can talk a little bit about that. Let's start with a little bit about your early years. I mentioned you lived in Gastonia, but you were born in Greenwood. Tell us how that happened and a little bit about your early life in Gastonia, what you remember, and things that you think are noteworthy.
Well, I think it's really interesting because I know that you've interviewed Bill Lawson, and he and I grew up side by side. Our parents were friends in Greenwood, Mississippi, and they came up here to Gastonia together to be in the cotton business, not together in the cotton business, but to participate in the cotton brokerage business. And there was one house for rent in Gastonia, so they rented it together. They were newlyweds, and Billy and I always said that they must have had a really good party because we were born 2 days apart, and then the two couples built next door to each other. So I grew up, although I was an only child, I grew up with Bill Lawson like a brother right next door. So we lived in a section called Forest Hills, which was just a fairy tale neighborhood. Everybody got together. There were a lot of children. And the Earl Groves lived in the center of this little circular street, which I think is now called 10th Street. I'm not sure. But we all would gather in their yard to play. And you know, it was such a free time. The parents just sent us out and said, come back in time for supper. And then we'd hear, Gwin, time for supper. And everybody would go home. So it was a wonderful neighborhood. We skated, we had hills, and we sledded. It seemed to me that we had a lot of snow in those days. For some reason, I just remember the snow. But we had a wonderful time growing up. And then when it was, we went to, I've forgotten the name of the elementary school.
Central? Gastonia Central?
The elementary school.
Right.
I think it might have been Central. Then we went to high school, which was 2 blocks away. We always walked home from the elementary school. That was through the 7th grade. And then high school started in the 8th grade, and we walked to and from the high school. So what I was trying to say is that it was such a safe community.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed like a long walk home, but now when I get in a car, it's not very
Mm-hmm.
far away.
Well, I mean, it sounds like good friends made your childhood early on a very happy one. And of course, Gastonia was a town built on textiles, and your dad
Right.
was in that business. Was your mother primarily a homemaker?
No, heavens.
Excuse me.
She was a career woman. During the Depression, she went to work. Daddy was a cotton classer,
Mm-hmm.
called a squeeger, I believe. Squidger, they called it. And that was before computers could tell you the length of the cotton, and the classes would pull it and pull it and pull it till it got to the breaking point, and then they had this ability to know how long it was. It was important to sell the correct length to a mill, because if a mill was a spinning mill and you sold them cotton that they thought was longer, it would break,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if it was a short staple. So
That was a valued skill in
that
the
was a
cotton business.
valued skill then. I believe it's done by computer now. But my mother went to work, having never worked before, as secretary to the executive secretary of Southern Comb John Spinners. And there were many, many mills in that group. He wasn't holding that position too long, and she became executive secretary of that and retained that position till 1945, about 15 years.
So you were used to your mother getting up every day and going to work. I mean, that was your memory
Right.
of her, and your dad obviously doing the same thing.
Right.
And you, I guess, went off to school and then came home. Were you home? Did you come home by walking with Bill, and y'all would
Right.
y'all would just arrive home after school?
Bill Lawson and Bobby Adams and Billy May, and we just had a wonderful crowd. We all lived in the same direction.
Right.
And we walked home together. And Billy and I had a little patch of woods we had to run through very quickly because we
Scary.
scared. Yeah, I wasn't going to say scared. I was going to say uneasy, but anyway, we were scared, and
Well,
we'd run through that.
You
But
mentioned the high school, which was, I guess, Gastonia High School, and
Yes.
it was
that
kind
was
of
just 2 blocks from where we lived.
renowned. Franco Ashley was the principal, I guess, when you were there. What was your high school experiences like at that? I know you didn't finish high school there, or maybe you did, but went somewhere
Well, they
else
were
afterwards.
wonderful. We had an indoor pool.
Which was rare for high
It
school.
was rare, but it was sort of, as I remember, very dark and dank. It wasn't conducive to swimming a whole lot because it was in the basement area.
Uh-huh.
But we also had a football team, and I remember sitting on the little low walls outside during recess, and we had a wonderful crowd. Robert Goldberg was in the crowd, and William Patrick. I think he's still living, I'm not sure. But of course, Bill Lawson and Sadie Moore Suggs, Nell Harden. We just had a very friendly crowd.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't cliquish at
Right.
all. but I was only there for 8th and 9th grade, and I went off to National Cathedral in Washington, where my mother had gone from Mississippi as a young girl I think she finished about 1919.
Did you want to go? Is that something that you chose to do, or was it kind of decided for you, or did you
It
have
was
input?
decided for me.
As it was in those days.
Yes, and but I loved it because my parents were strict, and I was used to discipline, you know. I was used to taking orders because I was an only child. And
Were you rebellious at all?
no, I liked
I'm
to be the
surprised.
Indian. I didn't want to be the leader. And no, I wouldn't dare be rebellious. You should have known my mother. She had a firm hand. Daddy was
Soft touch.
the soft touch.
Yeah.
Oh, and he always told me about his giraffe that lived at his office. And every day he would tell me what the giraffe had to eat that day. Oh, it had brickbats with onion sauce, and it drank gasoline one day. And then I never met his giraffe, but I loved hearing the stories.
All right.
And my father was quite the craftsman. He had a workshop, and Mother loved to paint as a hobby.
Sounds like you inherited your artistic abilities kind of honestly from both of them, maybe.
I did. Daddy loved to sing and dance, and he was always doing the Shuffle Off to Buffalo, and he could speak in accents of any language and just make you roll in the aisles. He was a wonderful raconteur and could make a 2-minute story into a 20-minute joke.
That's kind of a lost art. Not too many people can do that anymore. Or
Well, it's very common in Mississippi.
is it?
You know how many good writers come from Mississippi?
True.
And they just have this art of storytelling. Mother could tell a good story just as well. And they both had good sense of humor, which I didn't inherit, unfortunately. But I wasn't afraid to go to National Cathedral. It was a new adventure, and I loved it.
What did it do for you?
It was really a home away from home at the time that my parents divorced, and it really molded me, I think, more than almost anything else.
How did you mention your parents' divorce, and your well, that must have been hard being away when that was going on. Was that tough?
We went down to Mississippi, Mother and I, and lived over in Arkansas to get the divorce. She went to the University of Arkansas while we were there, and we came back, and I started then at Ashley High, and no one else had divorced parents. So I felt like I was going to school with a great big scarlet D on my face. But actually, my friends never said a word about it, and so it just brushed over. And
right. Well, did you, when you were at the National Cathedral School, I guess during part of the war years?
The war started in 42.
Right.
I entered at 39, and I finished in 42, but I finished in June, and the war started.
December in 41, actually.
In December 41.
Right.
Right. I was wrong. It started in 41, and I can remember, of course, exactly where I was on the staircase at Cathedral when we heard that news.
Mm-hmm.
But we had all been to the White House for tea and all those things. Life changed dramatically then.
Right.
We began to roll bandages for the Red Cross and write letters to the soldiers, and it was different. And it was there that I met my future husband. I was about to turn 16 when I met him.
Mm-hmm.
And he was at State College, Bob Dalton. And he was a friend, he was the roommate of my best friend's brother. That would be Sarah Dawson. And Claude Dawson was his roommate at State College. So I met Bob at a card dance. We each had a little card with 12 spaces, and we swapped dates with all of our good friends.
Did you write the name on the card?
Yes, and his name, Bob Dalton, was number 12.
Uh-huh.
So,
Save the best for last.
Save the best. And I should have caught on early, because the first thing he said to me was, "Is that your dorm?" And I said, "Yes," through the window there. "Whidbey Hall." And he said, "And which one is your room?" I should have caught on.
That would be a kind of a subtle sign that he was interested in you. I think.
Right. So he began to come up from State occasionally.
Mm-hmm. It's a long haul at that time.
Yes, and on our first date, this was another clue I should have caught on to. On our first date, we climbed the Washington Monument. Well, I should have known that he liked to climb and be first and do adventurous things, and it did lead to a wonderful life.
Yeah.
Well, and then I finished in 42 at Cathedral and went straight to Duke.
Mm-hmm. And that was during the heavy war years. And,
yes.
And you were at Duke University, and I mentioned in the intro that you majored in chemistry, which the thought of that was, I can't even imagine. Was that an unusual major for someone at that time, a female particularly?
Well, there were 6 girls in the chemistry class.
Okay.
And the rest were, those in 42, most of the men on campus were either in the Naval ROTC or the Army ROTC.
Right, they were going to be shipped off at some point.
There was an engineering corps training there. There were a lot of uniforms on campus.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a good time dating them, but as it turned out, most of the guys our age were then sent off to war.
Right.
And we dated mostly med students after that. But Bob was at State when I started at Cathedral, and I started in the fall of 62. He graduated State in 43.
Yeah, and you started Duke in the fall of 42, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay, all right.
And but he would come over on the bus because automobile traffic was very sparse during the war. The gasoline was rationed, shoes were rationed, tires were rationed, sugar was rationed.
You had the coupons.
You had little coupons
that would give you a right to buy.
That you could use. And I remember my roommate at Duke was Jane Sherrill, whose father started the S&W cafeterias. And later, he owned Baldhead Island.
Wow.
Before it became a resort.
Right.
But we wanted to drive to Washington one holiday, and we had to get someone to donate a coupon because the family car needed a tire to go to Washington.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your and certainly I'm not, as far as Duke is concerned, there may be some other memories that you want to share, and feel free to do so. But I want to segue, if we can, a little bit about your life after you graduated. I think you went to work as a chemist, or at least in that area, but that didn't last too long. And kind of tell us what happened to Gwin Dalton when she got out of college, and you graduated from Duke. I'm sure you were proud of that diploma as your
Well,
mom.
I graduated in 3 years.
That's
I
impressive.
always said I graduated coom, push, and pull to finish chemistry in 3 years, but chemistry majors could accelerate because they were needed for the war effort.
I see.
And at Duke, I did, to contribute to the war effort, I did research on frangible bullets by shooting a machine gun in the attic using these bullets to test whether they were going to be breakable when they hit a plane. It was testing the temperature that you could use a bullet. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that was a project, and I was also president of the sophomore class, but having finished in my junior year, I had to concentrate on studies that year. But after that, I worked for a short time in New York as a chemist, and my mother had remarried and moved to New York, so I lived at their house, which was Upper Fifth Avenue, and took the bus and the subway out to Jamaica Plain to go to work.
What was New York just wide open at that time, bustling, crazy?
It wasn't, as I remember, as anywhere near like it is now, because I used to be able to drive around New York without being a bit nervous, and I wouldn't think of it now, but it was, I do remember the people were rude, and I usually got home crying because somebody wouldn't let me, it was very packed, and they wouldn't let me stoop down in the bus to see what the next stop was. And I'd miss my stop, and I just thought people were quite rude up there.
Southern manners had not infiltrated north of the Mason-Dixon line.
Other way around. But shortly after I went to work, Mother persuaded me to enter this competition that I had never heard of called the Maid of Cotton. And it had been going for about 8 years, and she knew about it because she was in the textile industry. And when she went to New York, she actually worked. She wrote the cotton textile section of the Encyclopedia Britannica that was current at that point. But she wanted me to do that. They were looking for a goodwill ambassador called the Maid of Cotton. It was not a beauty contest, and it was really looking for someone who could speak with ease, to speak with strangers or speak to strangers, meet people.
Kind of an ambassador role for the business, for the industry.
Tell about the cotton industry, because people didn't seem to realize that you could wear cotton in the winter. It made velveteen, and it made corduroy, and those were winter fabrics.
Right.
And any fabric for civilian use was very scarce then. Almost all of the textiles were used for uniforms or cording for parachutes, or the heavy fabric that goes into automobile tires. It was all going to the Army
Tents
effort.
and all those things, yeah.
And so I went down to Memphis for that, and it was sort of a big thing in the South at that point, although I never heard of it, but everybody else apparently had. Bill Lawson was in the audience at the Peabody Hotel for that. Not my friend Bill, his father. I could hear his big booming voice cheering me on. And surprisingly, I won the contest.
I think that you're selling yourself short, but that's okay. We'll say surprisingly.
Okay. So I won it. And
Yes.
we started a tour for a year, which was every 3 days we went to a different town. My tour manager, who was a former newspaper reporter, journalist, and a wardrobe manager, and myself. And we had to go on the train because my tour manager was afraid of flying. Mm-hmm. I loved it, but we had to go on the train, but that was good. It gave me time to write endless thank you notes to the people we just met. We would go to a city. There would always be a police escort, lots of flowers at the train station when we arrived, very often presented by some representative of the city, and then we'd interview the mayor or the governor or whoever the authority was. If it was in Washington, we went to the White House. And
did you meet the president?
I didn't. Truman was the president at that point. Roosevelt had died while I was at Duke, and Truman had become president. The senator from Tennessee was the
Baker?
president pro tem, and I did meet him. In fact, he gave me a kiss on the cheek, which
Was that against
wound
protocol?
up in Time magazine. And I didn't know there was a small issue of Time that was made for the soldiers overseas, so Bob got a big rag out of that.
I bet he did.
Yeah.
Well, you told me an interesting story when we were kind of preparing for this about your visit to Boston. I think that's worth retelling.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it might be interesting for people who are listening to this. Or
Well,
watching it.
I had an uncle and aunt, two uncles and aunts who lived in Boston. So when we made our Boston stop, of course, I wanted to spend the night with uncle and aunt. But my official call was on Mayor Curley, and he said, I have arranged for a young man to show you the town. So he introduced me to this tall, scrawny, sort of good-looking man named Jack Kennedy. And he showed me the town that day. I thought he was pretty cute.
Was he gracious and entertaining?
Very much so. And he was well-spoken. He was just home from the war, and he was very lean. As I found, most soldiers come back.
Mm-hmm. Not a lot of extra.
No extra pounds on them. They've been working. But he showed me around all day, and that night when I went back to my uncle's house, I said, oh, I had a cute date, showed me around the city today. And they said, really? Who was it? And I said, Jack Kennedy. And they said, you are never to see him again. Well, of course, when he ran for president, I was his biggest supporter.
Absolutely, you should have been, is what you should have been. Well, that's the story for, I think people will enjoy, and I think it kind of shows you what the opportunity, one of the opportunities or things that happened during that year that you were made of cotton because obviously that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise.
No, it wouldn't
And I'm sure after coming out of Duke too, it was probably an eye-opening experience to go all over the country and see the country.
Well, it was, and when we got to Washington, it was a big deal because, of course, we had Southern senators and congressmen, and I remember speaking before the Agricultural Committee and other committees. I remember leaving a cotton bowl on the president's desk, which was also pictured in the New York Times. And
You've been in every major publication.
oh, well, the celebrities were all over entertaining the soldiers, so they made a big do out of this. But we had a congressional ball, and my dress was specially woven from Hope Skillman fabric. It took 20 yards. And some of the newspapers wrote that it was very bad that we used 20 yards of fabric on a dress when fabric was so scarce. Mm-hmm. Because even though the war had ended, I knew Bob was safe. He'd been wounded, but he was safe. And we just were giving these fashion shows at every stop to promote the fact that now we had good fabric again that could be used for home sewing.
Right. The war was over, and
yes,
it was time to kind of transition from military
back to civilian life.
Right.
And people wanted to know where they could get the fabrics. Well, the shows were usually held at big department stores which carried McCall Patterns, which was one of the sponsors of the Made of Cotton tour. It was sponsored by the Cotton Council in Memphis. Ford sponsored it and had a beautiful convertible station wagon waiting for me at every stop. It had the sign Made of Cotton on it.
Wow. You were in high cotton, I guess. Excuse the pun. We are close to kind of hitting our time limit. I want to, if we can, spend just a moment or two, because you came back to Charlotte and raised your family, and somehow found time to be involved in the life of Charlotte. And also behind us are some beautiful sculptures that you made of your children and I guess some friends, maybe your husband as well as others. And
his is in the front hall.
Oh, it is? He has place of honor.
Bob and I were married 72 years and lived in Charlotte the whole time except for 4 years that we lived in Southborough, Massachusetts, when he was promoted and had to go north.
Well, the mills were there too, weren't they?
Actually, the mills were down here.
Oh, were they?
And he was made sales director for domestic sales at White Machine Works, which was headquartered in Whitensville, Massachusetts. So we moved to Southborough, and he kept telling him it would be better to stay in Charlotte because the mills were all here. And these were cotton mills. And so after 4 years, they realized it would be better because he spent all week back in North Carolina, back in the South, traveling. But we loved our New England years. And then we moved back here. And that's when we were both able to be very active in community things. He became president of the Textile Club and president of the chairman of the board of the Charlotte Symphony, and he was chairman of the board of Brevard College and of Brevard Music Center. And, you know, when you're headquartered and your home is there permanently, you can contribute to your community.
Right.
And I was very active in the Mint Museum, mostly as president of the auxiliary. And
I know you don't want to toot your horn too much, and I won't put you on the spot in that regard, but I mentioned in the intro that you were involved in the little theater, or that acting was a kind of a passion of yours, which
well,
you got nominated to do a lot of local productions, and the art and obviously you spent a lot of time raising your children too. I don't see how you found time for all the things you did. Does it seem like it?
I did love the theater, and from Cathedral and Duke had experience, and then the Maid of Cotton, so I wasn't uneasy on the stage, and so I did quite a few little theater plays, and Bob stayed home with the children at night. But that was one of the few forms of entertainment early on in Charlotte. Mm-hmm. So
where does I would love to have 5 hours. I think we could fill 5 hours, but I want to know if you've thought about where all this creative energy comes from. Do you think you were born with it? Did you develop it? Can you share kind of your thoughts on that, or is it just something that just was always there?
Well, I found early watercolors that my mother did, and I remember her painting as a child. Like, she painted a sailing vessel onto the card table and things like that. Daddy was ambidextrous and loved to dance and sing. Mother couldn't carry a tune, so I know that the singing part came from Daddy. And that's the only place I can guess it came from. I love to be creative, and I love to use my hands. I made almost all the clothes that we girls wore, my 2 daughters and I, when I was first married. Up until the time they married, I made Dee Dee's wedding dress. But then I liked the stage, and then my daughters, when I was 80, gave me a private lesson in sculpture, which I had done starting when I was 13. Daddy gave me some sculpture lessons down in Gastonia, but I didn't continue that after we moved to New England. So I'd never done a head, and I loved it. It was like going to class with all these young people, who were young marrieds, made me feel young. And I like to garden, and
your home outside, beautiful.
Bob and I traveled so much. We went to 74 different countries. We sailed a lot. We didn't even count the islands that we went to, but we sailed in the Caribbean and the Grenadines and New England. So,
well, let's finish with this, because, and this is a little bit of a gotcha question because we didn't talk about it, but you've got a multitude of children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And,
they were all here Easter.
I know you've had a busy week. I want to leave you to put your head down.
Woo.
I'm sure you've had a fun but busy week.
It was great.
Is there any advice or anything you'd like to, maybe you don't, I think maybe your life well lived is an example for them, but is there anything that you'd like to kind of tell them that has been important to you? I know your church life, your community, and friends, those are all kind of the foundations of who you are, but you're welcome to if you have anything that you kind of like, little words of wisdom, people that you think might be something that they would enjoy hearing or benefit
Well,
from.
I learned a lot from my parents. I learned from my father, and I do hold with this. I try to be fair and kind to people. I used to always have this fleeting moment of how would I feel if someone said that to me, I don't know, it just flashed, and I think it was a good thing because it's much easier to keep a friend than to have to apologize and try to get a friendship back. Bob, I was Episcopalian and very involved in that at National Cathedral. Then I married a Methodist, and we began to go to his church. He was quite a church goer, his family too, very instrumental in building Myers Park Methodist Church. And so he and I led a life going to church with our children every Sunday. And I do think that's quite important. I just believe in treating people with dignity and remembering that we're all born as little babies. And everybody starts out with something they can contribute. And that's the way I feel about it.
Well, we thank you for contributing to 90 Over 90 and for being here, Gwin, Barnwell, Dalton. We hope that you have a restful rest of the week. And
Thank you.
We will thank those of who were able to review this online. Until next time, we'll see you on the internet. Thank you.
Oh, thank you too,
Yes,
Rob.
ma'am. Bye.